She'd always wanted to go to the Holy Land, and most important of all, her son volunteered to come with her. So that mother and son booked these tickets, looking forward to it. And in the time in between, he contracted a very severe form of cancer. And so when the pilgrimage came around, he wasn't able to go with her. And so the shoes that she was wearing were his shoes. Wow. Because she wanted him to be able to walk in the footsteps of Christ.
This week, I want to focus on how we embrace the journey when we feel empty-handed. That awkward moment when you turn up to the party and then realise it was a bring and share and you turned up without anything. Life can feel that way too. Have you ever felt just not enough sometimes? Or like you're just not equipped for the job at hand? Ever felt like this was a battle brewing that you never asked for, never deserved, but you feel utterly empty-handed? Well, David was in this exact situation in 1 Samuel 21. David is on the run from Saul, but because of the urgency, he's ran with no supplies. As we know, David comes and first asks for bread, and Ahimelech the priest gives him the holy bread from the tabernacle. But then David asks for something else. I'm just going to read verses 8 and 9 of 1 Samuel 21. It says, "And David said to Ahimelech, is there not here on hand a sword or a spear? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." So the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped up in a cloth behind the ephod. If you take that, take it, for there is none other like it." And David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." This sword was a symbol of how God had previously stepped in for David, used him to bring about an incredible victory, and kept him safe. This was the very same sword that David used to defeat the giant, save the nation of Israel, and win the battle. God giving David the sword at this exact point in the story is a reminder. Don't be afraid, David, I've got you. Remember how we killed the giant together. Yeah, Saul's no big deal. He was too scared to fight Goliath, and I promise he won't fight you either. God has a secret weapon stored away for us. Even though some of us feel like we're in a tight spot, maybe life's not going our way and we feel backed up into a corner or on the run from some struggle, God has got a secret weapon for us, and he's holding it until the time where we most need it. Maybe it's something from a previous victory that he saved for such a moment as this. Possibly it's something we've even forgotten about, but it comes back to you at the perfect hour, and as a powerful reminder of the victory that God's done before and what he'll do again. You know, I remember so many times Psalm 77, "I will remember the works of the Lord. I will remember your wonders." But there's another key when you feel empty-handed or unequipped in some way, and that's be mindful of who we're running with. If we jump forward a few chapters to 1 Samuel 26, and David is yet again on the run from Saul, and he's hiding in the wilderness. And Saul comes searching for him along with 3,000 of his finest troops. No pressure, David. Saul sets up a camp, and he's laying right next to Abner, who's the commander of the army. All the troops are encamped around Saul. He appearingly could not be safer. Well, David, being the fierce warrior that he was, despite being on the run, wants to go into the camp and remove the spear and the water jug that are laid next to Saul's head. So he wants to do this to prove yet again to Saul that he doesn't want to harm him. He doesn't want to be his enemy. So, verse 6 of 1 Samuel 26, David turns to two people and asks if they would go with him: Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai the son of Zeruiah. Now consider for a moment your options. David, who's on the run in the desert, asks you to go with him, to sneak into a camp of 3,000 troops, walk right up to the man who wants him dead. That's quite the challenge. A lot could go wrong. It would only take one of the 3,000 men to wake up and see you, and you would be incredibly surrounded and outnumbered. The circumstances did not look great. They were empty-handed, and the odds were against them, as it were. But one determining factor changes on how those circumstances look, and that's that God was with David. So he looks at these two guys and says, will you go with me? You can imagine Ahimelech weighing up his options, thinking, 2 of them against 3,000. Let me think about it. No thanks. Now his no is not actually recorded, but we can guess from the silence that it was a big fat no. Whereas Abishai, on the other hand, says, I'll go with you. I'm all in. You see, he knows that God is with David. He knows that fierce giant killer has fought some extraordinary battles before and is still standing. So he wants in. I'm with you. So they do just that. They manage to sneak into the camp, past all the troops, right past Abner, who is supposedly guarding King Saul. And they remove the spear and the water jug. Now, scripture tells us that God had put them all into a deep sleep. Isn't it interesting how we weigh up our odds based on human wisdom? But it means absolutely nothing when you add God into the equation. You could have 10,000 troops coming up against you. But if you've got God, then you're still the winning majority. So once back at a safe distance, David shouts over, asking the army commander, where are the king's spear and water jug that were near his head? Saul recognises David's voice and realises that yet again, David doesn't want to harm or kill him, and so he retreats. But what really leapt off the pages for me as I read this fascinating account was that 2 men had the opportunity to go with David into the camp, and the one who said nothing is never seen or heard of again in scripture. But the one who said, I'm with you, I'm in, appears again years later. In 2 Samuel 21 and verse 16, there's a battle again going on between the Philistines and Israel. And suddenly an enemy carrying a bronze spear that weighs over 300 shekels and this new sword says he's going to kill David. But who jumps to the rescue? Abishai, the son of Zeruiah. Then in 2 Samuel 23, yet again, now we're in David's final days, and Abishai is listed again as being one of the chief in David's mighty warriors. The power of saying yes. That yes years earlier wasn't just a yes to David, but it was a yes to God himself. David is known as the giant slayer, and suddenly a man who's walked by David's side for years, in the good times and in the bad times, is right there, ready and able to kill a giant himself. How do you become a giant slayer in your life? Get around people who have killed some giants. You want to know how to overcome pain and the crisis that you're currently walking through? Then get around people who have lived through trials and have come out the other side victorious. It's crucial who we spend time with, who we allow to influence our lives. Take a look at your closest friends and ask yourself, how are they influencing you? Is it for better or for worse? Are they the type of people who say yes to God, even when things are tough? Or are they more like Ahimelech, where silence is not so golden? Recently, I had the honour of spending the morning with Pam Rhodes. Pam, what a pleasure to be here inside your beautiful home. Absolute honour to have you on Embrace the Journey.
No, it's lovely to have you here.
Thank you. So, for years, you've presented on Songs of Praise and you've been asking everybody else the questions. And even just now over a coffee, you've asked me question after question. You can tell it's in your DNA. But I want to know about you. Tell me, how did you first come to know Jesus?
I can't ever remember a time when knowing Jesus was just a very natural way of life for me. I'm of the generation who not only went to Sunday school, as we all did, it was quite a good social occasion, but also in schools generally. For many, many years, there would be school assembly every morning and it was always Christian. So I remember learning Bible stories there. I remember singing traditional hymns every morning, and I've got a great love of hymns. I'm an anorak about hymns, and I'm sure it starts from then. But then, I suppose we put to the test that sort of embryo faith when we get out in the world. And for me, it just always made absolute sense. So it was never a road to Damascus experience. It was just always there for me.
A journey that you went on. And what has Jesus meant to you through the years?
Well, I suppose the word would be friend. I mean, he's been such a companion to me for so long. I sometimes worry that it's far too comfortable, the relationship I have with Jesus. And then I have to think when I'm singing hymns, as I say, I love hymns. And, you look at the words that talk about his the hugeness of him and the awesomeness of him. And I always think, actually, that's not the way I know him. So I find myself talking, and I'm sure that's a form of praying. I talk to him in the car. It's part of everyday life. I can't remember a night that's not finished with prayer, just bringing the end of the day to a close with prayer. So the most important thing in my life, really.
Wow, that's beautiful. So over your many years on BBC or all different kinds of networks and channels, you've had the honour of interviewing pretty much a whole wide range of people, everyone from the Pope to Dolly Parton. Tell us, what is it like meeting the Pope for a start?
Well, yeah, it wasn't exactly an interview, but I did meet him and talk to him, and we spent a week at the Vatican following him around. This was Pope John Paul II, wow. And he was quite ill then, and I remember thinking I wouldn't want my granddad to have the life that he had, where he was working and on performance, really, for hour after hour, very hard working. And we did a Songs of Praise from one of the great big churches there. But Dolly Parton was wonderful. I met her at 8:30 one morning to do an interview with her for Songs of Praise, and a great interview. But at one point in it, she said, "My mother said, when I was a young woman," she said, "I should never go to church in a skirt that was too short." So she said, so I haven't been to church since, which I'm sure is not true, because of course she writes wonderful Christian songs and she is a Christian lady. But I think that summed up just the wonderful character and personality that she was. But of course, you meet a lot of famous people. Everybody always says, who have you met who's famous? But actually, they're not the ones that mean the most to me.
Okay, so tell me about that. So you've met all these incredible people that the world would look to. But I know you've shared with me before that actually it's been the ordinary people doing extraordinary things that's actually really challenged you or inspired you through the years. Can you tell me a couple of those stories?
Yes, I mean, Songs of Praise traditionally goes all around the country and is based in different towns and cities and countries around the world. And there you get to know just people who live in streets that are just like mine or yours, really ordinary folk. And the thing about us, of course, is that we're all so unique to God. Mm-hmm. And it's that uniqueness which has always touched me. It's the incredible... I was going to use the word humility, but I think it's more like humbleness, just an acceptance of God in their lives. And sometimes those lives have been incredibly challenging. I mean, they talk about death. I mean, tea time on a Sunday on BBC talking about death. Who wants to hear about that? But they talk about the reality of facing their own death or dealing with the loss of someone who's very dear to them, bereavement quite often. They talk about loss of other kinds. They talk about losing their sense of worth or who they are when life changes for them. Perhaps the family shape changes. Perhaps it is that bereavement. Perhaps it's the children leaving home. Perhaps it's losing your job. Perhaps it's divorce. All sorts of awful things can happen. They talk about hope. They talk about pride. They talk about love. They talk about doubting. And I've always thought Songs of Praise is exactly the place to talk about doubting, because don't we all doubt? Mm. Don't we all have questions? Isn't it through asking all those questions that you mentioned that you find out what you truly believe? And they talk about prayer. And the most impressive thing to me over the years is all the number of occasions when people have talked about how they've prayed. And perhaps not immediately, not in the way they think or even hope, but that God is in it. And sometimes it's not until later on that they see that. And they also talk about dealing with prayers that aren't immediately answered, like losing the person that you're praying desperately to stay alive. So all of those things I've absorbed like a sponge and learnt so much from them, and keep in touch with quite a lot of them. Okay. Some of them I've known for decades, because when you go along to someone that you know has had a terrible time and you say, "Tell me about how it was when you lost your daughter," and you've only been in their home for half an hour, there is such an intimacy in that conversation. I can't tell you how many ended up with us both in tears or hugging. And, you can't walk out of someone's life when they've trusted you with that. So I've got these wonderful, wonderful friends, a little black book full of people who have been totally inspiring to me.
So that's a good black book. Most
It
little
is a
black
very good
books
black
are
book.
not good to be in. But that's a good one.
Yeah.
Can you think of one particular story that's probably inspired you the
Yes.
most through the years?
Yes, I mean, there are so many, but the one I keep coming back to is Vincent Uzoma, who was the black teacher who in the city of Leeds was teaching. He and his wife are both chemists, and they work half in industry, and then they both had a heart for teaching. So he was doing supply teaching, teaching chemistry. And one morning, while he was writing something on the blackboard, he turned around and he felt a thump, and a 14-year-old boy had stabbed him because the day before he had taken away his mobile phone because he was using it in the lesson. Oh. And he fell to the floor and he said, "I saw my life's blood draining away." And he said, "I thought I was going to die." And fortunately, they managed to get him to hospital quickly enough. The recouping took a long time, but he came through. And 5 months later, he was in court with this scrap of a lad, a 14-year-old, in the dock. And he said that he looked at him and just realised that because of his background, because of his family, he couldn't possibly blame him for what he'd done. And he just thought, I've got to let go anything I feel about this. And he came out on the steps of the courthouse, and there were lots of film crews there. And he just said, "I forgive him. Wow. I forgive him." And I just thought, I wonder how many people could do that. I mean, if that happened either to them or to someone they loved. But it totally set him free. And I think over the years on Songs of Praise, I've heard so many stories where people have held onto resentment, and it's like a cancer if you don't let it go. And actually you have to learn to forgive and be forgiven too. And not just know from the Lord's Prayer that you are forgiven by God, but actually believe it in your heart if you feel that you're holding something that you've done that's bad to other people. So I think forgiveness is such a difficult and challenging subject. And Vincent is fit and healthy and lovely, and he really did move me.
Wow. I think things like forgiveness, they're easy to talk about, far less easy to live through and walk through. I know previously I've heard you share about a time where you were challenged, and you were in Israel at the time.
Oh, yes.
And there was a lady in a pair of shoes.
Yes.
Talk to me about this lady.
Well, we went on a pilgrimage with a Christian group. There were several busloads going, and Richard, my husband, and I were on board. And you have like 40 people in a coach, and you all get to know each other very well. And it was a very jolly crowd. And except there was one lady, Phyllis, who was an older lady, absolutely delightful personality, but she just was driving everybody crackers because she was holding them up, because she was always the last back and to the coach. And I don't know if you've ever been around on one of these trips to the Holy Land. I bet a lot of your viewers will have done, and they'll know it's a whistle-stop trip. All these places with names you've heard of since you were a kid. You want to go and stand in front of them all, tick them off, and you want to experience them, and you just need to keep going. And Phyllis was driving everybody mad. And the trouble was, what they found, what got them grumbling, was not that she was disabled or anything that they could understand, but she was wearing completely the wrong shoes. She was wearing sort of like flip-flops with a bar across that looked several sizes too big for her. So she was literally shuffling all over the place. And I thought, well, she's just an accident waiting to happen. And unfortunately it did. When we were in Bethlehem Square, she took a tumble. I mean, it wasn't bad. She just, she shook herself up rather than hurt herself. So Richard and I spent the rest of the afternoon walking at her pace and making sure we got back to the bus on time. And that gave me the opportunity to chat to her. And she was so excited about being on this pilgrimage. She'd booked it a year before because she'd always wanted to go to the Holy Land. And most important of all, her son volunteered to come with her. So that mother and son booked these tickets, looking forward to it. And in the time in between, he contracted a very severe form of cancer. And so when the pilgrimage came around, he wasn't able to go with her. And so the shoes that she was wearing were his shoes.
Wow.
Because she wanted him to be able to walk in the footsteps of Christ.
Wow. Wow.
And well, what love.
Yeah.
How humble, how faithful. And we were in Bethlehem, so it made you think about another humble, faithful mother who gave birth to a son and watched him with all the concern and pride and worry that mothers have, but who knew that one day she would watch him die.
Wow.
So we're very quick, aren't we, at judging the book by the cover. And, you know, you asked about being curious about people and wanting to know their stories. That is why, because we can so easily just whitewash people. We don't know that everybody is unique and they've all got something very dear and special about them. And isn't that the best thing in life, to be able to find out what that is?
Absolutely. Through this episode, I've been looking at how if you want to be a giant slayer, you've got to run with some people who've slayed some giants in their time, you know, and how some of David's mighty warriors have actually gone on to kill giants themselves after spending years with David. And that's why I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure through your years, whether it's people in your little black book or whether it's been walking with the likes of the Phyllis's of this world, there's been times where you've been challenged to your core and it's actually changed you in some way. Is there anything you want to share on that?
Well, do you know, that reminds me of that episode in the film The Wizard of Oz, when they are really fearful of this huge and terrible wizard. And then eventually there's the great reveal where it's just a little man at the back, you know, and actually there is no giant at all. And I have a feeling that actually, because we're all little men, all little people, really, that the most important thing, bearing in mind the huge problems and challenges we all have to face in the world, the terrible things we want to put right, that it starts with each and every one of us. And that actually God has given us not just unique qualities, personality, limitations, opportunities, but it's actually up to us to make use of them and find out what we can do that's unique to us. And I think, first of all, we need to just, well, in the words of that hymn, you know, this little light of mine, you in your small corner and me in mine. I think we just have to do what we can do in the area where we have real influence. So get your relationships right. Yes. You know, find peace in your families, in your marriage, in your friendships, in your communities. And I think that just as in God's creation, huge oak trees from little acorns grow, I think we are the giant, really, aren't we? We have to respond, each and every one of us, in good conscience and with God's help, to slay any of those giants that come along.
And I think that's what I love about the church, that as we come together, all of us with different talents, different skills, different characters, and as we come together, we really can, you know, that's the beauty of the body of Christ. We can do it when we stand together. So whether it's been friends through your past or people who have just crossed your path like Phyllis for a short time that have inspired or challenged you to go further, and that's the beauty of the body, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Well, Pam, what a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much for sharing with us. It's been an honour.
All right, thank you.
What a bank of incredible conversations and memories Pam has. Allow me to wrap up these concluding moments together by saying this: more than anything or anyone else, the person to get around is Jesus himself. Nothing will fill your tank like spending time with him. He's the one who equips you. He's the one who puts the sword in your hand at just the right time when you need it the most. He's the one that empowers you to kill the giants. You see, I think of Gehazi, Elisha's servant, in 2 Kings 4. The Shunammite woman has just lost her son, a promised child that she's eagerly awaited, and now he's died. It's a desperate situation. So Gehazi runs on ahead of Elisha and the grieving mother, and he lays Elisha's staff on the boy's face. But there's no sound and no response. The boy is still laying dead on the sofa. So Gehazi goes back to meet Elisha and says, the boy has not awakened. Then Elisha finally reaches the woman's home, and going into the room, he stretches himself out and begins to pray. This time, the boy's body grew warm. The boy sneezes 7 times and he opens his eyes. Gehazi may have been holding the prophet's staff, but that staff was only powerful in the correct owner's hands. A staff in the Old Testament would often represent someone's life. Well, you can't use somebody else's life to get you through. There are no shortcuts. It's only after laying your own life down that the power comes. I think sometimes people want this quick fix. They want to have the power without the surrendered life. They want the miracles without the intimate relationship with Jesus. The truth is, you have got to know Jesus for yourself. The reality is, you're never empty-handed when you're walking with God, even in the times when you feel it. He is our equipper. He is our rescuer.